So our first speaker of the day, today's conference, as you know, is very much about looking to the future. And what we're going to be doing today as entrepreneurs is starting to look not just 12 months out, but 10, 15, 20 years out. And to start that, we've got an amazing speaker who's built over 4 businesses himself. He's a 2-time Global Entrepreneur Award winner in the category of big business. And he's authored a book called The Battlefield to Boardroom, 10 Proven Strategies to Combat Mediocrity. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm round of applause to Jay Allen. Oh, he also likes to be like one of these people who keep clapping. Keep clapping. I think he'll make it up here eventually, Jay Allen.
Good morning. Good morning. Oh, come on, that was a dentist waiting room. Good morning. Wasn't that such a fab, brilliant start to the day? This stuff just gets it all going, doesn't it? Good morning and welcome to the Thriving Entrepreneurs Conference. I'm so thrilled to be able to be here and share with you over the next 3.5, 4 hours. Is that right? Yeah, cool. An idea about being able to get big or simply go home. Is that fair? Is that what we're all here for? Fab, okay. So I believe that everything starts with a story. And I want you to be able to understand the importance of the clarity you need to be able to have in being able to tell your story because of the impact that it will have for both you and your future. I'm one of those kids that wasn't born into a box under a bridge and had to eat glass for breakfast, as we've heard so many others speak. I was fortunate enough to have been born into quite an affluent family background. My mum was an MP. My father ran his own business. I was predominantly brought up by a nanny, which all sounds rather nice, but in actual fact has its own set of problems. You see, I didn't fit in. I wasn't one of those people that enjoyed the silver spoon of opportunity. I wanted to be with all my mates and play football. So for as long as I can remember, I rejected everything that was being offered to me because it all came with strings. It all came with expectations, and I wanted to be able to create my own. So I was fortunate enough to be able to get just sufficient O-levels. Yes, I am that old, but the creams work well. I got just enough O-levels to be able to enter college and just enough A-levels to be able to enter university. Still having no real idea as to what I wanted to be, but certainly lots of ideas about what I didn't. And it was in university I had that first spark of inspiration, that first spark of understanding, when I realised that I was becoming part of the system that I hated in the first place. You see, at school, I don't know about you in the school you went to, but certainly in the school I went to and the school that my son went to, we were taught, get your head down, turn up early, put in a full day, work hard, and you might achieve sufficient results to get to college. Has anyone went to one of those schools? And then when you got to college and you were told, you know, if you really get your head down and you study hard, you might get some good qualifications sufficient to be able to get you to university. And then these days, if you work 6 hours a week, if you work really, really hard at university and get a first, you might get a good job with a 46, 47, 48,000 pound debt around your neck that's determined that you're now tied to a responsibility till you're 35, 40, 45. I recall my ex-brother-in-law celebrating on his 38th birthday having finished paying off his university loan. And that's what we were born and brought into. My concern was that the system breeds us a dependency on the system. And yet, if we want to become an entrepreneur, we have to be willing to first turn our back on the system and say, do you know what, that's not for me. I want to march to a different tune. I want to play a different tune. I want to march to a different rhythm. And that often defies everything that we were ever taught in school that was all about being able to work towards goals and systems and being part of the process. To become an entrepreneur, in my experience, I've had to be able to step outside of that. I've had to be willing to do something different. And being able to do so enabled me to be able to go off and do a few successful things. So first of all, I left the university. I understand that's the first pound in the pot. If anybody else has got mobile phones, that's a great prompt to be able to just remind you to switch them onto pause or silent or whatever it is that you need to do. But I left university quite disillusioned with the university degree and what it entitled me and expected me to do. And instead, I joined one of the greatest institutions in Britain. I signed up for Queen and Country and joined the British Army. If there was ever going to be a part of me that needed to be able to get something out the system, it needed to become fully embraced in the system to understand as to what I needed to do. So I signed up for a minimum of 3 years, Queen and Country, in order to be able to get this alpha male thing out my system with the expectation that it was going to give me all the answers that I needed in order to be able to go on and do something afterwards. And what I didn't realise is that 7 months into basic training, I fell in love with the difference that it made. Because every day was different. There was no plan. There was no understanding of what was coming next. We faced with whatever came at us and we overcame it. Faithful throughout adversity was the core motto of the corps I joined. Faithful throughout adversity. It doesn't matter what was thrown at you, I will stick to it. And I fell in love with it. I fell in love with it so significantly that I did it for the next 14 years. My claims to fame is that from the day I finished qualifying before the first Gulf War, my first tour was Northern Ireland, whilst that was still fun. Followed quickly by going to meet Saddam and his troops on the first Gulf War. And then there was a political decision to determine that we weren't ready to be able to extract all of his oil from him to start off with. So the recourse and we came home. However, 3 Christmases later, 3 sequential Christmases later in Bosnia, that was a fun tour. Staying in the same shelled out hotel that Eddie the Eagle did his famous jump from 10 years prior. I was promoted in the third trip to Bosnia. They said, we've got some great news and some bad news. I says, I really do need some good news. 3 Christmases on the trot without my wife and son, I could do with some good news. They said, you've been promoted. Congratulations, you've come off the promotions board. We're going to entice you further into our system so you feel compelled to stay a little longer. That's great, thanks very much. Some cash in the bank. I said, what was the bad news? I said, they need a corporal in Kosovo, which just kicked off over the border, and you're closest. That was an interesting phone call home. Hon, you know, as I was due to come home in March, see you in September. Yeah, first divorce later. And then back to the Gulf the sequel, Gulf War II as we used to call it, or Gulf War the sequel. However, rather than making it a career of mine to be able to move on within the service, I was involved in quite a significant accident in the second Gulf, which deemed that I was flown back to the UK. I was courtesy of Headley Court. I understand it's no longer with us. It's been rebuilt into Nottingham, but I was a survivor of the second Gulf and went into the Headley Court to be rebuilt. Whilst they were rebuilding me physically, I was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder to the state that I was sectioned under the Mental Health Act to protect myself, for which I stayed for the next 14 months in protective custody. What I didn't acknowledge, and this is the first biggest learning for you here today, is the significance of mental health to physical well-being. I had no correlation that my mental capacity to understand what was right and wrong and what was working and what was not had a direct correlation on my physical well-being. And it didn't matter how many times I went to physiotherapists to learn to walk again. I'd broken my back and my leg. Nothing was working because this wasn't fixed. And it took them about 14 months to unpick the the minefield that is my head to the state where I was able to be able to find a way through it. And 5 weeks after my mental health had been fixed, 14 months in, 5 weeks after I got the clear bill of health here, I was discharged from hospital being able to walk again. You see, there's a massive thing about what we think and what actually physically happens, and we need to understand that we've got to have positive thoughts and positive ideas and a vision for moving forward that is clear and concise in order that our physicality can actually put things in place. Does that make sense? Fab. Now, the next hurdle was leaving the army, because after 14 years in uniform, I was quite institutionalised. I've got some education. I continued my education throughout the army. So by the time I'd left, I had a master's degree, I had a bachelor's degree, and I was studying towards a PhD. I'd managed troops. I'd looked after large amounts of people. I'd managed a team of about 120 people. I'd managed a P&L budget sheet for a budget of about £3.5–4 million a year. If there's anybody in HR or anyone that's recruiting, on paper, I looked quite good. Therefore, over the next 10 months and the 159 interviews that I applied for, I was offered 154 job applications. I was able to go through for interview. And at interview, as you can probably tell, I'm quite communicable. I like a conversation. I interviewed quite well. But I also believed in telling the truth. So when they asked that embarrassing and awkward question with regard to the fact that it said on your CV that you left the army in February 2003 and you're applying for this job in October 2005, where you been? I said, well, that's easy. I was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder and I've been sectioned under the Mental Health Act to protect myself. But I'm fine now and I'm looking for a job. All of a sudden you go from being a good catch to a long-term sickness absence risk. On 4 occasions, the interview was halted and I was asked to leave the premises because they had a duty of care to protect their staff. You can imagine what that does to your mental health. Having been successfully shortlisted for interview to subsequently interview cancelled. And what I subsequently realised is that if I'm not capable of being interviewed and successfully winning a job, then perhaps the system isn't capable of looking after me. Maybe I have to be able to make my own luck. So I turned to entrepreneurship. If nobody else is going to employ you, employ yourself. Amen? Yes. Fab. Cut a long story short, because we've got lots to get through, and you did say only say 3.5 hours. 10 years later, 4 businesses later, having exited twice, taken a business from 3 staff to 22 staff, and then sold it back to the existing 3 members of staff, twice over. Having won 2 international awards for big impact to business, and a listed last year on the Clear Business Thinking Power 100 as a business influencer in the UK. Things have turned around slightly. It would be lovely to be able to go back to those 4 people that escorted me off the premises and said, do you want a job? But throughout all of it, it's been a case of understanding that we've got to have clarity here in order for this to be able to do so. So I want to talk to you about how to get big or go home. So the statistics that were printed out and shown on the video are not things I've made up. These are not statistics that have come from the top of my head or from a little Google's research. This has come from the British Chamber of Commerce, the Federation of Small Businesses and the Chamber of Commerce that collectively ran a study back in 2015 of 355,000 small business owners in the UK. And we're able to categorise them into one of 5 different categories. 1% of businesses in your industry right now are smashing it, breaking all of the guidelines, breaking all of the rules. They are industry leaders. They are making exceptional amounts of profit and money and growth year on year and year. And you've only got to take 1 second to be able to think about who is the big national or international competition in your industry and think, wow, wouldn't it be interesting if I could just get 0.0001% of Google's turnover last year? there are a further 4% of business owners in every industry, in every sector right now, that are doing really, really well, that are well on the way to joining that elusive 1% club, but perhaps haven't just got the systems or processes and people ironed out well enough in order to be able to move into that elusive 1% bracket. And there are 15% of businesses in every sector, in every industry, that are doing okay and making more traditional style of 5%, 7%, 8%, 10% growth year on year on year and year on year. But 355,000 responses and 60% admitted to struggling, to getting by, to hoping that it was going to, there was enough month left at the end of the money and there was enough money left at the end of the month. And 20%, according to Companies House, 20% of businesses in every sector, in every industry, fail and close every year. 80% of businesses are either struggling or failing. And I think that's a great statistic. Is everyone with me on that one? Yeah? Because you see, one of the other things I want to quickly share with you is that inner voice of doubt that prompts us to say, they've got a new website. We're going to have a new website. They've started to do podcasts. How on earth do you do a podcast? They've printed stuff and put it in the Times newspaper. How much is that going to cost? We have this inner niggling voice of doubt about our own capability that we continually look to others that we measure ourselves against and judge ourselves for, and guess what? 80% of them are wrong. Stop following other people. Stop being the black sheep that continually just carries on in the background in the hope that we could hang on to the coattail. Oh, they've done something else. There's a lovely expression, when everything is going right, turn left. Be different. Stand out, become unique. Surely that's the whole purpose of being an entrepreneur in the first place, is to be able to have a story and be willing to tell it so many times that other people begin to believe it. So I don't blame teachers, but I do blame a system that fails us to help us visualize and imagine a different type of future. We have to understand that today is operating quicker than yesterday. And the education system still hasn't caught up. We've got to be willing to be able to challenge everything that we're ever taught before in order to be able to move on and start creating something new about the future. So what I'd like to share with you over the next few minutes is the things that we were taught in school that we ought to train for, that predictions say by the time we retire will not exist any longer. And the things that perhaps we ought to be considering to train for that don't even exist yet. Is that okay? Jobs you train for that simply aren't going to exist. According to statistics, and this is research that's been done by MIT, by Harvard, by Oxford, by Cambridge, by Eton, have pulled together to be able to look at trends, and I know Daniel's going to be exceptional talking about other things that are happening later on this afternoon, but trends that are happening and things that we need to understand more of. So first of all, they anticipate by the year 2025 there will be a 17.2% reduction in the amount of production line and manual manufacturing. That's pretty much a given, isn't it? However, unless you're in this industry, perhaps some of your customers are in this industry. I saw a significant slump in one of our businesses a few years ago when when one of our main clients started to be able to reduce the amount of orders with us purely on the basis that the industry that they were in was taking a dive, and as a result they didn't require our services. Suppliers too, and the second tier of influence that happens as a result. So production line and manual manufacturing. 17.4% of secretaries and PAs as we start to move towards AI and the ability for it to be able to have predictive text and predictive influence is to be able to reduce the amount of secretaries and PAs, certainly in large institutions such as this. 18.1% prediction that by 2025 textiles and manufacturing are all going to become automated and computerized, and therefore a reduction in the amount of people actually on the line creating these things, although there will be, as you see later, a significant rise in the amount of creativity and the people coming up with new and innovative ideas that feed into this industry. So 18.2% photography and photo processing as we move towards digital, as we move towards being able to do lots more things ourselves on our phone and the likes. We're going to be able to see a significant reduction in the amount of people in the industry actually doing the doing. We do it all for us. 19.1% prediction in a reduction of paralegals and legal secretaries. There was an incredible study done in America 2 years ago where they took 10 of the top barristers and they created an AI bot. They gave them 100 cases that had previously been heard in the large international courts, and they got the 10 top barristers to collectively predict the outcome of these cases. At the same time as they gave the cases to the 10 top legal barristers, they gave a computer programming company the profile to build an AI bot, to learn the law, and to predict the outcome of the same 100 cases. 76.6% of the barristers got the prediction correct on the 100 cases that have already been previously heard. It took them 10.5 months to be able to do the research. The AI got a score of 99.1. It took them 17 weeks to be able to predict the outcome. It wouldn't surprise me if in the next few years we see far fewer paralegals being able to do all the research in the background and simply people in the courts of law being able to determine what the outcome is. So machine setters, operators, drilling, milling, moulding, anything to do with manufacturing, as again it's going to move into a digital age where we see more and more computers being able to take over and less manual work in the workplace actually having to be able to manage these things. Moving up into almost the 20% now, so 20% less journalists or pre-press technicians. We have all become journalists. How many people here in the room don't blog? A small handful. We have all become journalists. The need for a qualified journalist to go out there and find the story is probably becoming less and less as we tell our story. Let's move on into the higher 20%. Postal workers, sorters, delivery workers. 21.6, data entry operators. It's all being done by automated technologies these days. 22% in telesales or answering services. Again, Google have just created the new app to be able to answer your phone, answer a question, being able to give you a response as if it was a human voice, and in actual fact it's simply an automated bot. 29.7, almost 30% now, watch repairs, jewellers, restoration workers. 35%, traffic wardens, yes! Finally! We get a happiness. However, the biggest prediction is 78.6% reduction in train drivers, tram drivers, navigators on ships and aircraft as we start to see digital and automated technologies being able to take over and run that type of industry for us. Not only if you're in this industry is it coming to an end and becoming prehistoric, but in actual fact anyone that's supporting or providing into this industry or the suppliers to people that are working into this industry are likely to see a drop in trade also. That's the bad stuff over. Shall we look at some more good stuff of things that perhaps we ought to consider for the next 10 to 12 years? These predictions are up to the year 2030. Just to make you aware, all of my slides will be made available to you. There's a click link at the end if you want to be able to take all of these for future reference. So things that you ought to be aware of, things that are happening right now. The first couple of slides are things that are predicted up to 2025. The next slide is from 2025 to 2030, 2035. So first of all, a 16% increase in sales and sales staff. This really surprised me. I firmly believe that sales was likely to take a back seat as we did more and more online. And yet the predictions suggest that whilst we are more and more comfortable to be able to make small purchases without the need for human intervention. The more that we want to spend, the more conscious decisions, the more bigger investments that we make, we still require a humans-to-human intervention, someone's to be able to give us that emotional connection to the purchase that we will want offline as opposed to online. And this prediction says, with an additional 1 billion people being born into the planet in the next generation, that there will be an increase in need for sales staff to be able to provide to them. Anyone that's working in food, particularly clean food, particularly nutrition, will see a significant increase, certainly over the next few years, but then as it continues to grow and grow and grow, prediction of a 16% per year increase over the next decade or so. 18% in education, although the majority of that is going to be on online education, where we are able to access our own learning as opposed to more traditional formal styles of education, going back to school, college and university. So the opportunity to be able to massively increase online learning or downloadable courses is on a continued trajectory of increase. 23% in the creativity industries. Woohoo! So this is 23% year on year expected to be in the creative industries. That is both visual, audio, and other methods of being able to communicate with people with regards to either touch technology or certainly China 2 or 3 years ago started to consider the opportunity of being able to create smell-o-vision and being able to create aromas to be able to attract a further sense. So we're looking at creative industries of other methods of being able to get information or impact or emotion from one to another. 26% increase in medicine, although the majority of this is going to be in the removal of chemical-based intervention and looking more towards natural-based herbology and the moving back towards plant extract as opposed to having the needs to pop a pill for everything under the sun. It was interesting, under this research, I found that in America, where there are so many people that are considered clinically obese, that you can now actually take a pill. It lasts 28 days in your system, and it's a Bluetooth tablet. Literally, not a tablet, a tablet. And you eat it, and it sits in your gut for 28 days. And if you start to get some form of rupture or any form of ulcer, it sends an app to your phone and tells you need to go to the local hospital because of how many people are suffering from that at the present. Someone's invested hundreds of thousands and thousands of pounds in coming up with something as opposed to just teaching them that McDonald's is not the great answer. However, we're going to see a significant increase in the amount of medical automation, organ limb development. I certainly recall, if anyone's looked at the story of how Help for Heroes first came about, Bryn was a OC in the infantry, came back from the Gulf and realised that his troop, his section, that there'd been 17 people that had been injured to the extent that they needed a prosthetic limb. And the local hospital said, we just haven't got the budget to be able to provide a blade, a prosthetic, the new style blade for all of your soldiers. The first tranche will end up with good stuff, 68,000, 70,000 pound each. The last few to come out will probably end up with a wooden leg, 2,000 or 3,000 pounds. And Bryn said, I will not have my servicemen not able to have the latest information and technology available to them, will have to raise some money. And he went to his local paper and said, can the local populace help a hero? And it got pushed to the Sun newspaper. The Sun newspaper ran the ad. The army needs you. He was hoping to raise 2.3 million quid and raised 3.2 million quid and said, what do I do with the excess? And yet 13 years later, 241 million pound of your kind generosity later, and they are almost now the Camelot being able to help other service users because of the amount of need for clinical intervention. It's all about being able to understand more about how we can utilise or help people. I was watching a video only yesterday about Google Glasses that have been able to help somebody who was born blind see for the first time on his 51st birthday. And the impact, just the tears rolling down this man's face, having never seen his family before or where he lived or what the dog looked like, was just exceptional. So there'll be a huge growth in medical intervention with regards to technologies able to be able to help and support other people. 37% of developers, as we know, tech is on the way up, and we're going to see more and more programmers being able to manage the vast amount of tech that we now have in our daily lives. And 52%, a big increase in what I was quite surprised about to start off with when I did the research, but waste management. We have finally come to the conclusion that we can't just keep throwing plastic bottles away and hope that the fish will survive. So understanding more about the impact, what we do with our waste, and how to manage that in a more concise method is going to be a huge industry over the next 10, 12, 15 years. However, quickly moving on, there are a multitude of other job descriptions that are about to be released over the next 12, 13, 15 years of perhaps things that you haven't even considered yet. And like I say, if you want details of this, I've put together a 12 or 13 page report which will be available to you on the slide deck if you want to be able to take access to it later, of things that we haven't even considered before. Multi-movement architects. What the hell's one of those? But they do suggest that it's going to become a new career in the next decade or so. So all of these things, like I say, if you want to take a photograph of the slide and listen to the other, but I have created a report, and if you want to take the report, you're more than welcome to, are careers that don't even exist yet, that are in the infancy. But we know because of the way technology is moving and the way that we are looking at things are going to have a huge impact on us and our daily lives and our daily requirement into the future. As I start to wrap up and start to be able to possibly have time for one or two questions, I want to quickly share with you the impact that me or you can have on this type of stuff. Because it's all right me sharing it and talking about it on stage, but perhaps one of the questions is, but how can I impact that? That's such a universal, worldwide issue that what can I do to contribute to it? So I want to talk to you very briefly about something that I call the ripple effect. The most important person in your life right now is you. Because ironically, if you're not here, nothing else matters. So the centre is you. And unless we can look after ourselves, we can't look after anybody else. It's vitally important that we take the time to be able to spiritually develop, physically develop, mentally develop, in order that we can have bigger impact on the decisions that we make into the future. However, beyond you, and as soon as you are okay, I'm presuming that you either have some significant other or dependents or this and the other. We've got our inner circle of people that we are there to protect and work for. Is that fair? Cool. So our next ripple on the pond is about looking after how can we impact the people around us who matters the most. But then as we look further on, as the ripples continue outwards, the next ripple would be either our employees or our local community or our extended family, the people are in our favourites list on the phone. And then if we look further still at the local community and then perhaps our region or our town or community. And then if we might be to a national level. And the final ripple that runs all the way around this is humanity. And what I want to suggest to you is simply stop chasing cash. You see, cash, money, loves to play the game chase. It's cat and mouse. And whatever our story is, but I've just got to be able to make the money. I've just got to be able to generate X. Generate X is always one step ahead of us. It's always something that we're continually chasing. And yet, if we put cash to one side and replace our desire with impact, you'll find that cash gets rather bored with you not playing with it, and comes and finds you. Because what I'm referring to is bigger thinking and bigger impact. This slide is of the few things that are being considered at a worldwide level. These are the problems that the world face right now. And according to UNICEF and according to the UN, between now and 2030, $17.7 trillion is going to be invested in trying to overcome or at least get a grip and trying to manage these issues. So if we want to be able to look at impact, if we want to be able to really consider with regards to how do I make a difference, perhaps we ought to consider one of these and say, what is it that I do right now? What is it I'm going to get involved in over the next few weeks or months or years? What is my concentration? Where's my efforts? Where's my focus? And how can I use some vision and some values to tie my story, not into, but I want to be able to feed my kids, but understanding as to how we can have a bigger impact, either directly or by co-locating or collaborating with other people that are working on bigger stuff. Because I mentioned Google at the very beginning and the 0.0001% of their profits. I wouldn't mind 0.001% of the $17.6 trillion that's going to get spent worldwide in the next 10 to 12 years on trying to overcome some of these issues. Does that make sense? Just nod or shake, it tells me you're not asleep. Cool, thank you. However, the only way we're ever going to achieve any of this is understanding how to work together. Rome was not built in a day, but Rome was built by a force that came together for the greater good. I firmly believe that in this generation and the next, collaboration is the new black. It's about being able to, how do we work collectively to be able to pull some of these issues together? I've got a few minutes left. I've got one short video to play with you, and then I'll be able to take questions. On the next slide, there's a short video, but there's also the link if you want to be able to take access to all of the slides, and if you'd like to be able to take the download, a 12 or 13-page report based on the information I've shared with you today. Ladies and gentlemen, I'll play the video and then I'll take questions. Ladies and gents, I am informed that we're pushed for time, so thanks very much for your time. I hope you've got lots from us today. I'm here all day. I'm sat on this table here, and I've also got some books available over in the back corner that are available at breaks and lunchtime and that type of stuff. So without further ado, I'll hand back. Thank you very much.
Thank you.